So I have the honor of introducing our speaker for tonight, Dr. Anne Pearson. Dr. Pearson is a recently retired professor of religious studies at McMaster University, where for many years she taught a course on cross-cultural perspectives on death and dying, amongst other course offerings. She is the author of a book about the importance of ritual in the lives of Hindu women, titled Because It Gives Me Peace of Mind. I just looked it up. It's on Amazon, and I'm really looking forward to getting it and reading it. So she has been involved with numerous community groups and boards, including chairperson of the Hamilton Interfaith Peace Group, the Toronto Board of the Parliament of World Religion, and of Pearson College of the Pacific. She's also the recipient of the Order of Hamilton for her work promoting interfaith education for peace. Anne Pearson is also the granddaughter of former Prime Minister Lester B Pearson. My kids were like, "Oh, that's the airport's named after him." I'm like, "Yes." So, and I just have to say that we are really grateful to Anne, as she had very short notice for tonight's talk. And we really appreciate that she so kindly accepted to be our speaker and share her thoughts with us today. Now, I tried to keep the introduction very brief because, you know, I could go on, but I don't want to take up precious time of hearing. And quickly, the topic for tonight, as you all know, is the Interfaith Movement. The quote on the invitation by Gerald Filson, I loved it, who serves in the Baha'i External Affairs Office of Canada, is a very thought-provoking one that says, we need a kind of dialogue that can harness the power of religion to help humanity tackle its most challenging problems. Yes, we do. So the pandemic has shown us vividly that we, the people of the world, are interconnected and interdependent. Many people view religions, however, as existing in silos, apart and often in conflict. Yet, since the end of the 19th century, there has been a growing interfaith movement that offers another view on social issues, from poverty reduction to climate change. This talk will review this landscape and the role of the Baha'i, that the Baha'is play by their active participation in it. With that, I turn it over to dear Dr. Anne Pearson. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Vida, for your introduction. You included more than I had sent, so you must have done a bit of research. So thank you. I'm honored really to be here tonight. And thank you, Faruzande, for organizing these weekly gatherings persistently for so many months now. Especially during this pandemic, which just feels like time out of time. And it's nice to have this kind of weekly anchor, I think, for many. So I'm going to try to share my screen now, and let's see, select application. No, that would not be it. Just a moment. Let's see if I can find my PowerPoint slides. So you let me know if you can see them once they come up. Taking a while. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes, good. Okay, so let me go to slideshow from the beginning. All right, so yeah, you've heard just now of course, that my topic is the interfaith movement, and I will be describing the Baha'i participation in and perspectives on it. So, at the start, I'd like to note that the growth of the interfaith dialogue or interfaith movement and the many acts of multi-faith collaboration around the world is one of those good news stories that we hear so very little about in the news. As was stated in that description of my talk, when people hear the word religion, or when it's mentioned often in the press, it's very frequently cast in a negative light, and reinforcing so many people's views that religion is in fact a cause of dissension rather than a cause of cohesion. But I want to give just one example at the start of this kind of multi-faith collaboration that I've been involved with recently. Since February, I've been working with a group organizing a campaign called Love My Neighbor, which is a project to increase COVID-19 vaccine delivery to the poorest nations of the world. And it's really being driven by a diverse group of Canadian faith communities, really right across the board. Muslims and different Christian denominations, and Hindus and Sikhs, and so on and so on. And also in partnership with Millennium Kids and UNICEF Canada to help write the ending of the pandemic story. Because the goal is to encourage Canadians to supply 38 million additional vaccines to our neighbors. Of course, the population of Canada is about 38 million, so that's one for every grateful Canadian who, we're each receiving our vaccines for free. And we know that delayed vaccinations in poor regions of the world put everyone at risk of additional COVID mutations for many years to come. And in fact, at the current rate of the vaccinations going on around the world, at the current rate, it's going to take decades for everyone in the world to be vaccinated. So until everyone is safe, none of us are safe. Of course, we also have a moral responsibility to our brothers and sisters around the world. And that is what's coming out of the multi-faith collaboration, because all of the different religions of the world see this moral responsibility to look after our neighbors, to look after the poor, to look after those who are vulnerable. So with that little plug for Love My Neighbor, I'm going to now turn to offer a snapshot of the Baha'i faith and interfaith relations, which will also offer, will also serve to give you a sense of the scope of the interfaith movement over the last century. Now, in the history of religions, Baha'is have an unusual place in the arena of interfaith relations, insofar as their mandate to actively engage in cordial relations with those of any and all religions and faith perspectives is found clearly articulated within the text of the founder himself. Baha'u'llah commanded his followers to consort with the followers of all religions in a spirit of friendliness and fellowship. His teachings require Baha'is to strive to free themselves from any prejudices they might hold and to enter into meaningful relationships with followers of other religions. In fact, because Baha'is believe as a matter of theological principle that the religious heritage of humankind is the expression of the historical unfoldment of divine education from the one God through a series of manifestations, it follows that becoming acquainted with the history, practices, and scriptures of other religions is strongly encouraged for Baha'is. Now, beyond the inherent positive value of striving for cordial relations, Baha'i texts also warn that religious prejudice, claims to exclusivity, and the violent strife that may result from such attitudes are serious impediments to the advancement of civilization and to the unity and prosperity of humankind. Now, let me go back to the beginnings of the interfaith movement in the modern world. Interestingly, the Baha'i faith and the interfaith movement were both born around the same time, in the second half of the 19th century, a period during which the globalizing forces released by innovations in travel and communications caused ever greater number of peoples and religions to interact with one another like never before. In the colonial era leading up to the 19th century, European bureaucrats, soldiers, and missionaries encountered a bewildering variety of other worldviews and religious traditions. And then gradually a new consciousness of, quote, other religions began to spread to the European and North American public as translations of the religious texts, for example, those of Rumi, whose poem we just heard so beautifully put to music, and descriptions of the customs, the beliefs, and practices of foreign peoples became available. However, the attitude of the majority of the 19th century Christians towards other religions was that Christianity was really the only true universal religion. Of course, we know that many Christians still hold this view, as do those of other faiths. But so unsurprisingly, when the important First World Parliament of Religions was convened in Chicago in 1893, each day's sessions were opened with the Lord's Prayer and Christian hymns. But among 200 speakers, of course, most of them were Protestant Christians, but nevertheless, there was one Muslim and a small number of Buddhists, Hindus, and Jews. The important thing, though, is that this was something unprecedented, something new. Representatives of different Christian denominations, on the one hand, which in itself was not, hadn't happened a lot for Catholic, Roman Catholics and different Protestant denominations and Orthodox Christians to actually get together and talk with one another. But not only Christian denominations, but different religions getting together to learn from one another. Interestingly, this parliament was the first time the Baha'i faith was mentioned in a large public gathering in North America. Baha'u'llah's life and teachings are referred to at the close of a speech entitled "The Religious Mission of the English-Speaking Nations" by the Reverend Henry Jessup. And in this reference, Baha'u'llah is described as, quote, a famous Persian sage, the Babi saint named Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, the head of that vast reform party of Persian Muslims who accept the New Testament as the word of God and Christ as the deliverer of men, who regard all nations as one and all men as brothers. So with that statement, you got the Western world in this kind of formal public setting, first heard about Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah and his teachings are mentioned, though seemingly, as an example of the Spirit of Christ working in the world. And in fact, Baha'is would not have a problem with that. Now, the 1893 World's Parliament of Religions is often taken as the starting point of the modern interfaith movement. 2 years earlier, the organizing committee sent out a letter to religious leaders and scholars to explain the purpose of the Parliament, expressing its belief that the time was ripe for a new manifestation of human fraternity. They listed 10 objectives, most of which are surprisingly hopeful and open-minded, and continue to be reflected in contemporary interfaith organizations. These objectives included to show what and how many important truths the various religions hold and teach in common, to promote and deepen the spirit of human brotherhood among religious men of diverse faiths through friendly conference and mutual good understanding, to unite and strengthen the forces which are adverse to a materialistic philosophy of the universe, to discover what light religion has to throw on the great problems of the present age. So here, again, Vida quoted Gerald Filson's comment about what interfaith dialogue should be about, and it is already echoed so many decades ago, well, over a century ago, in these objectives that were proposed in 1891. And to bring the nations of the earth into a more friendly fellowship in the hope of securing permanent international peace. So most of these objectives accord with Baha'u'llah's teachings concerning interfaith relations and the purpose of religion. In one place, for instance, Baha'u'llah describes the purpose of religion as being, quote, to safeguard the interests and promote the unity of the human race, and to foster the spirit of love and fellowship amongst men. Further, counteracting the negative effects of materialism and applying spiritual principles to address the great problems of the age are, as I just suggested, significant themes in Baha'i literature. Well, then, as now, most participants in interfaith meetings would affirm the uniqueness of each religion, acknowledge the differences, witness commonalities, and also resist attempts to unify them in some kind of universal faith, seen as a form of unwelcome synthesis. This concern about the folding of the unique religious traditions into one continues to be expressed in the current Parliament of the World's Religions stated approach to its work, which is that it, quote, seeks to promote interreligious harmony rather than unity, end quote. Well, clearly the concept of unity of religion referred to here is not exactly the Baha'i notion. Rather, for Baha'is, unity of religion means, as Abdul Baha explained, oh, sorry, I missed that one. Oh yes, it's down here. As Abdul Baha explains, that the foundations of the divine religions are one and the same. And thus the Baha'i faith rather profoundly recognizes the many important truths the various religions hold and teach in common. Now, as the Baha'i faith spread, its ethnically diverse community members embraced and reflected its core belief in the oneness of humanity and the unity in diversity it implies. In its interactions with people of diverse faiths, the Baha'is have been guided by specific exhortations and spiritual principles found within the Baha'i sacred writings. Now, here I come to this slide. They that are endued with sincerity and faithfulness, Baha'u'llah wrote, should associate with all the peoples and kindreds of the earth with joy and radiance, inasmuch as consorting with people have promoted and will continue to promote unity and concord, which in turn are conducive to the maintenance of order in the world and to the regeneration of the nations. Blessed are such as hold fast to the cord of kindliness and tender mercy and are free from animosity and hatred. Now, in this passage, the exhortation to associate with all peoples is reiterated, as are the appropriate attitude in which to do so, with joy and radiance, freed from animosity and hatred. And the effects of such engagement, the promotion of unity and concord, which is essential for humanity's prosperity and security. So in this and other passages, as Baha'is dialogue with peoples of other faiths, they are adjured to guard against fanaticism, pride, and contention, and are called upon to acquire such qualities as friendliness, loving kindness or loving fellowship, active listening, trustworthiness, kindly assistance, and service to others. Now, the Baha'i scriptures also provide the parameters within which diversity and dialogue can flourish, together with the principles and mechanisms, notably consultation, by which differences of views can be aired and addressed before they lead to conflict. Baha'is are encouraged to share the teachings of their faith with others, but such efforts are described as manifesting virtues in one's conduct, using wisdom, moderation, courtesy, and detachment. Explicitly rejected are coercion, deceit, and exploitation of fears and prejudices. Further, Baha'is are reminded by the words of Shoghi Effendi that the faith of Baha'u'llah disclaims any intention to belittle any of the prophets gone before him, to whittle down any of their teachings, to obscure, however slightly, the radiance of their revelations, to oust them from the hearts of their followers, to abrogate the fundamentals of their doctrines, to discard any of their revealed books, or to suppress the legitimate aspirations of their adherents. Now, as the perfect exemplar of the Baha'i faith, it is helpful to consider the actions and words of Abdul Baha as they pertain to interfaith relations and dialogue. He urged visiting pilgrims to Akka, where he was living, to put aside prejudices and even go to the churches and mosques. For in all of these worshiping places, he said, the name of God is mentioned. And while traveling in Europe and North America from 1911 to 1913, he met with many prominent religious leaders and thinkers, and he gave talks in dozens of churches and synagogues and other places. And in these venues, he pressed his listeners to use their God-given powers of reason to independently investigate reality. To the audience of St. James Methodist Church in Montreal, for example, he said, quote, God has created man and endowed him with the power of reason, whereby he may arrive at valid conclusions. And after affirming the unity of the divine prophets, he then asserted that, quote, the reality proclaimed in the heavenly books and divine teachings is ever conducive to love, unity, and fellowship. And then in similar talks to Christian and Jewish audiences, Abdul Baha helped to clarify basic Baha'i principles that offer a common foundation to interfaith dialogue: the independent investigation of reality, the oneness of religion, the role of revelation in all religions, and the purpose of religion to strengthen harmony among people and to advance civilization. Further, in the investigation of truth, he counseled setting aside presumptions based on inherited traditions, for they have contributed, he said, to disagreements and dissensions which afflict and affect humanity. These imitations, Abdu'l-Baha argued, are accidental and without sanction in the holy books. Well, certainly there was a range of responses, and not always favorable, among the audiences to such statements. Yet such talks remind us that interfaith exchange can be frank without being deliberately offensive. Indeed, it should not ever be deliberately offensive. So he was forthright in presenting Baha'i principles in these talks. Now, as the Baha'i faith continued to spread slowly across the globe, opportunities for interfaith dialogue also grew, including participation in new interreligious conferences, such as the International Conference on Peace by Religion, held in The Hague in 1928. Shoghi Effendi, then the head of the Baha'i faith, specifically encouraged Baha'is to participate in such interfaith conferences intended for the promotion of religious unity and international cooperation. Not surprisingly, then Baha'is were active in the interfaith gatherings that were associated with the creation or the formation of the United Nations in San Francisco in 1945. Now, significantly, Baha'is also began to initiate interfaith events, notably World Religion Day, established by the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States in 1950, to be marked on the third Sunday of every January. The day calls for peoples of faith around the world to recognize that all religions have common spiritual goals and mutual interests, and that despite the divisions that have existed in the past, religion can be a positive, unifying force. Now, subsequently, Baha'is in many countries, from Estonia to Singapore, from Gabon to Peru, have seized the opportunities to celebrate this day by organizing various interfaith events. And then relationships have developed through such gatherings that have then led to other multi-faith collaborative projects, such as the creation of the first Ukrainian Youth Festival of Religions in 2004. Now, the emergence of World Religion Day is one example of interfaith initiatives at a more local level that really only began to pick up steam, I would say, in the 1980s. Perhaps it is significant then that it wasn't until the early 1990s that a group of individuals in the US from different faith communities began to talk about having another grand parliament of the world's religions to mark the centenary of the first one. This would be a parliament in which lots of ordinary people of faith would gather together alongside the religious leaders and scholars. This time, the Baha'i community was ready to take on a significant role. In 1993, Parliament reconvened in Chicago, saw several Baha'is serving on the coordinating council and on supporting committees. And the excitement and enthusiasm elicited by this great gathering of humanity's diverse religious and spiritual paths led to a permanent board of directors being created to plan future parliaments. And so they have occurred. As you can see, Cape Town, 1999, Barcelona, 2004, Melbourne, 2009, Salt Lake City, 2015, and in Toronto in 2018. And the Toronto Parliament, whose overarching theme was the promise of inclusion, the power of love, pursuing global understanding, reconciliation, and change, was attended by over 8,500 people. And I should say, you know, as so many of us have been thinking about the recent discovery of 215 skeletons of indigenous children in BC, and searching our hearts and our minds to better understand the nature of this tragedy. And I'm sure many of us thinking, how can we move forward in this truth and reconciliation process? The Toronto Parliament, for the first time among all the parliaments, had a very robust Indigenous peoples program. And so you could have attended this whole week-long parliament focusing entirely on Indigenous knowledge sharing. It was really, for me, that was one of the highlights of the 2018 Parliament. Anyway, it was at this Parliament too that you had 3 Baha'i plenary speakers, 2 Baha'i film screenings, and over 50 presentations given by Baha'is on such topics as the empowerment of youth, the relationship between religion and citizenship, and the practice of interfaith dialogue. So I think there have never been quite so many Baha'is actively participating in so many levels of this Parliament as there were in the Toronto one. The serious commitment by Baha'i institutions to contribute to the promotion of dialogue is demonstrated by the Baha'i participation in other international interfaith forums as well. For example, in 1986, Baha'is were invited to participate in the Vatican-sponsored interfaith gathering, the First Day of Prayers for Peace. In 1989, the Baha'is helped to form the Sacred Literature Trust, created to publish editions of scriptures that could be made widely available to the public. And in the same year, they joined the New York-based Temple of Understanding. In 1993, Baha'is began to take part in the North American Interfaith Network, which has annual meetings in different parts of North America. And in 1994, joined the large and influential interfaith body called the World Conference on Religion and Peace. And Baha'i representatives participated in the important year 2000 Millennium World Peace Summit of religious and spiritual leaders convened in New York City, where 1,000 religious leaders from around the globe met in an effort to forge a partnership for peace, and resulting in a declaration called Commitment to World Peace. Now, how much was that in the news? You know, that you had 1,000 religious leaders from all the religions of the world getting together in New York City in the year 2000. It was not much press at all. And it's the same with the Toronto Parliament. It was so frustrating to try to get the press interested in this extraordinary gathering of people from all over the world, representing all these different religions. But of course, we weren't beating each other up or, doing violent and nasty things to each other. And so it wasn't apparently newsworthy. So there have been, in addition to scriptural and authoritative sources of guidance concerning interfaith relations, there have been relevant statements prepared by the Universal House of Justice since 1963 that have also benefited Baha'is in being involved in interfaith dialogue. And these include the peace statement to the peoples of the world in 1985, which emphasized the vital role of religion in achieving world peace. This document, personally distributed to tens of thousands of people around the world, elicited numerous commentaries and conversations. Among the recipients of the peace message was the Tibetan Buddhist Dalai Lama, who in March of 1994 became the first senior head of a religion to make an official visit to the shrine of the Bab in Haifa. Then there is the 2002 letter to the world's religious leaders, again, personally presented to thousands of religious leaders. Now, this unsparingly direct letter identifies key challenges for advancing not only interfaith relations, but also social cohesion and the prosperity of humanity. It urges the leaders of all religions to condemn religious fanaticism, to renounce claims of exclusivity or finality, and to undertake wider interfaith dialogue. It notes that while other forms of prejudice, such as racism and sexism, have been giving way to new public norms and principles affirming equality, and that doesn't mean, as we well know, that racial prejudice and gender prejudice has gone away. Not at all. It's just that it's more and more difficult now to stand on a soapbox, especially if you're a political leader, and make a statement supporting anything that smacks of gender or racial prejudice. But they can do so with religious prejudice. It's been allowed to fester. On the one hand, religion, this interesting letter, this important letter to the world's religious leaders says, on the one hand, religion is a unique power in humanity's collective life that has been the chief force binding diverse peoples together, awakening capacities to love, to forgive, to overcome prejudice, and to sacrifice for the common good, and providing a perennial source for moral guidance. Yet on the other hand, religion can be corrupted and its purposes perverted. The letter cites a number of examples of the form and effects of the corruption of religion, including blind forces of sectarian dogmatism that lead to outbursts of fanaticism that shame the name of religion. And Baha'u'llah himself said that if religion is a cause of violence and contention, it's better to do away with it because it's so against its fundamental purpose. Now, claims to exclusivity or finality defended by religious leaders have, in this letter, been the greatest single factor, it says, promoting hatred and violence. Further, religious institutions have often been the chief agents in discouraging the use of the intellectual faculties that allow individuals to investigate truth for themselves. Remember how this was highlighted in the talks of Abdul Baha back in 1912. The independent investigation of truth, how critical that is in this age in which we live now, more than ever. The invitation and challenge to the leaders of the world's religions from the Universal House of Justice is to consider what today will best serve the well-being of humankind as a whole. Is it in suffocating impulses to unity, impulses which are now evident in growing numbers of people, as evidenced by the Interfaith Movement, or in arousing prejudices and alienation and promoting hatred and violence in the name of religion? If religious leadership is to have meaning in the emerging global society, the letter states, appeals for mutual tolerance are not enough. Leaders of religion must allow in the sphere of religion the same kind of fundamental reorientation that other segments of society are embracing, the oneness of humankind and also of religion. Now, since the release of the letter to religious leaders with its explicit encouragement for Baha'is to continue to be, quote, vigorous promoters of interfaith activities, the scope of Baha'i interfaith engagement has increased exponentially, again, parallel to the significant increase in the formation of multi-faith associations and initiatives in a context where post 9/11, interreligious tensions, sectarian violence, and radicalization have flared. Now, this engagement includes collaboration with multi-faith partners at the international, national, and local levels on a variety of activities and projects aimed at, for example, articulating shared moral concerns, delivering collaborative statements about the mutual responsibility of faith groups and political leaders that they share for improving the lives of the most vulnerable people and species in the world. Or, you know, many at the local level, it's simply about learning from one another, or working together on local projects, such as reducing homelessness. There's been a long time interfaith group in Hamilton, for example, working on that issue of homelessness, or working on gender-based violence. So to conclude, this is the exciting part that the mainstream media rarely pays attention to. You know, the Baha'i writings talk about the forces of integration and disintegration at work in the world today. The fanning of religious prejudice is a force of disintegration. The interfaith movement is a force of integration. It is a force advancing the reconciliation of the world's people by drawing on the universal spiritual and moral principles of religion to address a world facing multiple intersecting problems of a global nature, from how to foster social cohesion in an age of fragmentation, to gender equality and human rights, to wealth disparity, and the critical issue of climate change. So you can be a part of this positive movement too. And if you're not already involved, I invite you to join it. Thank you.